Today, I am honored to introduce you to Ahmed Fouad Al-Khatib. I said that right? Is that good?
Sir.
Let's
Very
go.
Impressive.
A Palestinian-American humanitarian activist and peace advocate. Born in Saudi Arabia to a Palestinian family from Gaza, Ahmed moved to Gaza at age 10. When he was 11, he survived an Israeli airstrike that killed 3 of his friends and permanently damaged his own hearing. He has now lost 33 relatives in the ongoing war, and yet he continues to be an outspoken voice searching for peace on both sides. Ahmed offers a unique and powerful perspective on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I'm excited and honored to explore his personal story, unpack the realities of the current situation, and discuss practical steps toward a just and peaceful future for all. Ahmed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Delighted to be here.
I'm very excited to have you. Now, I have one more thing I want to read because I wrote this out. I want to be deliberate with how I say it, so I'm not gonna be conversational. I want to read this to you. Okay,
Please.
Ahmed, I want to start by saying I know we just met, and actually this will be conversational because that was a crazy first meeting. Your Uber driver, flat tire, came out to get you. It made it a much more lighthearted and honestly a wonderful first meeting. Gave you a big hug, and I'm very blessed and happy to have you here. And I know you don't know me. So before we begin, I want to be forthright and say, as you know, I'm Jewish. Mm-hmm. I lived in Israel for years. My family lives in Israel, and I'm obviously pro-Israel. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I am also pro-Palestine. And above all, I'm pro-human. I don't wish harm on any innocent civilian, regardless of their nationality or religion or race or literally anything. I want freedom, peace, dignity, and respect for all people, period. And while throughout this conversation we might find areas in which we disagree, I think that makes it even more important for us to discuss. Because we can't have peace without open dialogue, and I'm both excited and honored to speak with you, hear your story, and hopefully contribute to making peace between our people a reality.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I think nothing about that is going to make me or makes me uncomfortable or makes me nervous about having that conversation. I feel like this is the essence of what healthy engagement and dialogue. The word dialogue has been tainted for so many people because it unfortunately has. We'll talk about why, but it has represented shallow conversations rather than deep and meaningful and, yes, uncomfortable, at times borderline confrontational conversations. But I've been pivoting more toward engagements and exchanges, because those are the ones that allow us to really seek common ground without us erasing our individual identities, without us foregoing our individual convictions, while leaving space for learning, for humility, for acquiring new schools of thoughts, new ideas, new beliefs, new information that can help us bridge some of the gaps that exist, and to still be able to shake hands at the end of the day.
Yes.
and actually maintain civility and maintain open lines of communications. I feel very passionate about that, not just with the Jewish community or the pro-Israel community or the Zionist community. And Zionist, I put in quotes because Zionism means different things to different people. We can discuss that later. But even, unfortunately, within my own community, I find it difficult to have a lot of conversations within a lot of the Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian circles, mainly in the diaspora, which is ironic. Palestinians in Gaza are far more willing to engage with me, even those who disagree, than those who are in the diaspora. And so nothing about what you shared makes me particularly alarmed. And in fact, I appreciate the opportunity to always engage audiences that I feel are otherwise unreachable by large segments of what you would call the pro-Palestine community.
I love that. Thank you. And I love words, and I like that the instead of dialogue, engagements. I think that's powerful, and it has a lot of meaning to it. So I love that. And for anyone who's listening who is unaware of what diaspora means, just outside of Gaza, outside of Israel, correct?
Yes, and that's used a lot in the Jewish community, I understand.
Correct.
But I actually, we have a word for it in Arabic. It's called shatet. Shatet.
Okay.
And that's actually, and some Arab nations will use the word immigrants like there are different iterations of the word diaspora.
Okay.
And I just, it's interesting how there have been times when I got pushback from some in the Jewish community that felt this word should only be exclusive to the
Really?
Jewish community. Yes.
That's obnoxious.
There have been times when, I don't know, the Palestinian community didn't want to create that division. Palestinian Americans didn't want me to describe them as diaspora.
Okay.
They just see themselves as Palestinian, period. Don't try to paint us as outsiders.
Oh,
which is an
interesting.
interesting
Yeah.
dimension of some of the identity conflicts that
Yeah.
are the sub-identity conflicts within the Palestinian community. A lot of Palestinian Americans feel strongly that they feel strong about their Palestinian identity, and any attempt to add an asterisk to that is treated with a lot of hostility. And by the way, it's like someone like myself. I like, where do I fit from that? I've been in the United States coming up on 20 years.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Gaza, but I also have this unusual yet similar, unusual yet not uncommon experience of having been in the Gulf region, which half of Gazans work in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Kuwait, and then they build up a nest and go back to Gaza. So, like, for me, I've had this duality of being an outsider, in the sense that when I was in Gaza, some folks were like, "Oh, you're from, but you're not pure-blooded Gazan because you're a refugee from 48, and you lived in the Gulf." And then when I came to the United States, now some are like, "Well, you're not really an Palestinian American, but am I a Gazan American, or am I Palestinian, or am I Palestinian American? I'm a United States citizen. I've been here for 11 years." But so these sub-identity kind of issues are are an intricate, rather, part of how one gets to speak about the war in Gaza, Hamas, the conflict, peace, the relationship with Zionism or the Jewish state or Israel or the future. And that really has come to the forefront of my discussions since October 7th.
That's super interesting. It's very interesting, the labels people try to ascribe to you as well. For those who don't know you or your story, can you tell us about who you are, where you're from, and what has happened in your life to lead you down the path you're following now?
Certainly. And this is a long story that I'll try to share very briefly.
We've got all the time, so whether you're brief or not, I just want to hear your story.
Well, I'll mention some milestones, if you will, that are critical in bullet point format, just again for the sake of time, because I do really want to share some ideas and thoughts about that are more focused on the future and forward looking. But I was I was born to two Palestinian refugees. Refugees is the classification both at a kind of a legal level within the Palestinian system, if you will. In Gaza, 2/3 of the population are considered refugees, and those are descendants of 1948 refugees who were displaced during the Nakba, what Palestinians call the catastrophe, or what Israelis refer to as the Day of Independence. But there's a social label, if you will, a social dimension of that, which is that, again, 2/3 of Gazans are refugees, 1/3 of Gazans are actual Gaza natives. And that is part of the social fabric over there. So when you meet someone in Gaza and you introduce yourself, it's something that usually comes up in the first, 10 to 15 minutes of the conversation, to like understand, are you a refugee or are you a native? Which is ironic, and interesting, and
like, what role does that play?
So refugees, for example, they have access to UNRWA, they have access to services, they have access to the food parcels, the schools, the crowded, albeit free schools. They have access to the clinics. That is something that a lot of natives have long resented, because they are equally Palestinian. Some of them are equally as poor and needy, and yet they don't have the refugee status,
And they don't get
and
access
they
to
don't
it.
get access to it. So the
Wow.
UNRWA access in the past.
So do they
Yes.
have like a card that says you have a refugee status? That
Yes,
okay.
yes, and my family had that. Now, my dad and mom were born in legit and horrendous refugee camps soon after the Nakba in Rafah in
Okay.
southern Gaza. And refugee camps began as actual camps, but then they grew over time to their own communities with asbestos homes, with temporary caravans, then with little homes, and then gradually they became these densely populated communities. So that's why you have the Jabalia camp, you have the Khan Yunis camp, you have camps throughout the Gaza Strip, and then you have the main city. So you have like the camp that's technically part of as the city, but really it's its own community. I digress. So that had a major rather impact on my development as a young man, being a son of refugees. I had two brothers and two sisters. I'm almost the youngest. My dad worked for the Saudi Ministry of Education as a doctor, and my mom was a homekeeper. But then when we moved to Gaza, my dad worked for UNRWA. He
Okay.
ended up running some of the clinics for the different refugee camps. My mom was a math teacher for a government school in Gaza. And then 9/11, two things happened. Well, before that, I was going to talk about the Second Intifada and 9/11 and the year 2001. But I experienced the tail end of the Oslo peace process in the late 90s. And so for me, the Oslo peace process was a time of immense optimism and hope, as it was for so many Palestinians. For me, Oslo means we shed the Egyptian travel document
Yep.
and we got a Palestinian passport. Oslo means to me, Gaza had a short lived international airport that we flew into in 99 and in the year 2000. Hillary and Bill Clinton were in Gaza opening that airport. Oslo meant a joint industrial complex in northern Gaza near the Erez area, the Erez crossing. There was immense optimism that finally we were on a path toward Palestinian statehood, independence, self-fulfillment, self-actualization. There were thousands of Palestinians, 4,000 Palestinians who were released from Israeli prisons between 1994 and 1996. But I also remember Hamas's gradual rise to power. I remember the suicide bombings. I remember the instability associated with that. I remember the gradual division that was really happening around the Oslo peace process. And then finally, I remember the Second Intifada that began in the year 2000 and all the associated violence, whether it was internal violence as far as the different factions fighting it out, or Hamas and the PIJ's Palestinian Islamic Jihad, who were trying to undermine the Palestinian Authority, or whether Israeli violence in the form of bombardment, in the form of incursions, in the form of checkpoints. We had two checkpoints in Gaza. There was one in the Netzarim checkpoint, and then there was the Gush Katif checkpoint. And then I remember 9/11 happening and how that had massive implications in terms of where Gaza fits in the broader regional post 9/11 security architecture. And then I remember the 2001 bombardment incident in which I was walking home from school and happened to be passing by a Palestinian police station that was hit by an Israeli airstrike that killed two of my friends and
Oh, I'm
rendered
sorry. I think
me.
I misspoke on that. I
That's okay.
apologize.
You mentioned three. It's okay. It's okay. And rendered me largely the concussive blast, the wave of the blast, if you will, rendered me largely deaf in my left ear. And it was then at the age of 11 that I realized I really wanted an alternative pathway forward to leave the Gaza Strip. I started learning English and really paid attention to ways in which I could position myself with some scholarships or with some exchange programs to try to go to the United States or to Europe just to see what's out there. And finally, in 2005, I left as an exchange student 1 month before the withdrawal of Israeli settlements, the disengagement.
Oh, wow.
So that was another period of anticipation and hope
Yeah.
that maybe there could be a new chapter ahead. And yes, it was complicated. It was unilateral. Ariel Sharon, then Israeli prime minister, did it in an uncoordinated fashion. But I remember vividly one of the last people that I saw when I left in 2005 was my uncle Riyadh, who was my dad's youngest brother, who spoke perfect Hebrew. He worked in Israel in the 90s. And he said to me, inshallah, when you come back, things will be much better and I'll be working back in Israel and I'll be able to support our family and our folks. He was incredibly depressed because when the Second Intifada happened, like tens of thousands of Palestinians, they lost their ability to make a living and became aid dependent. Unfortunately, Riyadh would be killed in the bombardment following October 7th and the war.
I'm sorry.
And so just really briefly, just to wrap up the little bit of who I am. So I came into the San Francisco Bay Area, lived with a host family, went to high school as a junior, went to high school for a year, did a whole series of engagements, and then ultimately ended up finishing the program and attempted to go back to Gaza because it was time to leave after having laid a lot of roots in the San Francisco Bay Area and in the United States. But unfortunately, when Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit, a young Israeli soldier, in June of 2006, I was stuck in Egypt, unable to cross into Gaza. And because the borders had shut down and there was a mini war simultaneous with the Hezbollah 33-day war in Lebanon in 2006, the summer war.
Okay.
It's a very miniaturized October 7th, very, very mini October 7th. And so thanks to the support of human rights and peace activists, after months of being stuck in Egypt, I was able to come back to the United States, including a Holocaust survivor who financed my return to the United States.
That's
and
incredible.
Really allowed me to finish high school. I began applying for political asylum following Hamas's rise to political power. What was happening in Gaza, there were threats against the program that I had participated in. It was
By Hamas?
by Hamas and other jihadi type groups because they thought this was a form of brainwashing. This was a form of, turning us into spies for the Zionists or whatever. And so the very day of my political asylum interview in the United States was June 14th, 2007, which is literally the very day that Hamas violently took over the Gaza Strip and expelled the Palestinian Authority, beginning the path that we're onto right now. So I finished high school, went to college, got a degree in business, and in 2014 I became a citizen of the United States. So that was 11 years ago. And what I'll finally mention, just to wrap up this segment about who I am, one of the seeds that was really interesting for me when I first came to the United States is it was actually the first time, the first space, the first place where I met Jews and Israelis who were not involved with the Israeli military, who were not part of the settlement blocks, who were not at an equal setting, if you will. And it was a carefully controlled setting where it started just by merely normalizing the idea of a then 15-year-old kid from Gaza sitting in the room with a lot of Israelis and Jews and across the spectrum, not just the leftists, but folks who were very proud to be Zionists and to be pro-Israel. And then it went into phases. It was from, yes, the first phase was a kumbaya. Let's just have lunch or dinner and like be friends and just like, hello, hi, nice to meet you. Okay, have a wonderful day. And then it was like, let's actually hear each other's backgrounds and stories. Then it was like, let's actually hear each other's individual grievances without any, need to feel like we have to delegitimize somebody else's pain. Then it was like, let's actually hear each other's disagreements. Then it was like, and to me, that was actually a transformative process in the sense that it taught me, it wasn't just teaching me what to think of Jews and Israelis or self-identifying Zionists. It actually taught me the art of engagement and communication and exchanges with folks with whom you may disagree. Some strong disagreements, some moderate or modest disagreements. And that was the seed that really allowed me. And I'm not saying I became pro-Israel overnight. I was very proud to be a Palestinian from Gaza. And I was very strongly in favor of sharing the Palestinian narrative. But it taught me how to do so in a way that actually reached people instead of forcing people to put up walls. It's taught me how to start conversations rather than to make declarations and statements that ended conversations. And so that, I would say, was the early seed of transformation for me. And then let's really fast forward. I think one of the things that put me onto this scene, if you will, was when October 7th happened, and I had been involved in different pro-Palestine activities, and I was with Jewish Voice for Peace, Students for Justice. It was like 12, 13 years ago when I was younger. I was desperate I didn't have my family here. I was alone and I wanted to fit into a community. And I thought that the mainstream pro-Palestine form of activism would be a community, even though I always had disagreements with some of their approaches. Like, I was instructed explicitly not to talk about the Hamas rockets, even though I was usually condemning Hamas's rockets. I was instructed specifically to always pivot to Israel and not to say anything public about our community's own shortcomings and issues, and to always, highlight the Israeli side of the equation. And I felt that was not really helpful, because I wanted to separate Gazans and the just and urgent Palestinian aspirations from Hamas, from violence, from the resistance narrative. And then finally, October 7th was it. I could no longer stay silent. I felt that I was ashamed by the sense of the normalization of the taking of by some elements and of the there's pro-Palestine, and then there is, quote, pro-Palestine. The pro-Palestine community that normalized Hamas's violence in complete contradiction to what I was raised with, the values that I was raised with as Palestinian values of how to respect women's spaces, how to have boundaries to how far you can go. Yes, Hamas violated those values with suicide bombings, I agree, and with some of their despicable acts. Still, the idea of normalizing the taking of women and children and the elderly as hostages, dehumanizing folks in the kibbutzim, some of whom were truly people that looked at Palestinians in Gaza as their neighbors, that believed in peace and coexistence, that supported Palestinians, including my own father. I put out a tribute to my dad 3 days ago about he passed away 5 years ago. And I described how some folks, including in the kibbutzim around Gaza, helped my dad reach the Hebrew University to access treatment for his cancer. I felt that I could no longer stay silent in seeing the hijacking of the Palestinian cause and the complete destruction of any value system by people who don't know Hamas, don't know about its terrorism, and that Palestinians are actually its biggest victims. And I also was horrified that this attack really, Vivian Silver, for example, as being one of the victims, or one of the many victims of October 7th, but one who put herself out there repeatedly for the Palestinian people, for Palestinian rights, for justice for Palestinians against the military occupation. And there was no honoring of those victims, those Israelis who stood with the Palestinians. And this was treated as a purely military attack, and all the hostages that were taken were legitimate. There was no acknowledgement that killing, mass killings and executions of people, defenseless people in their homes and their bomb shelters, the executions. Like, I saw the footage, I saw the GoPros. And I, just as a human being, I was genuinely ashamed that an element, this is the key word, an element of the people of Gaza were a part of this. And I felt a duty to speak out and a duty to separate the rest of my people who had nothing to do with this, who are against Hamas, who Hamas's popularity was in the toilet. And yes, there were a few thousand who celebrated. Yes, there were a few thousand who went into the borders after the initial attack. We're still talking about a small number, statistically speaking, out of over 2.3 million Palestinians. And this was not being done by, I felt, anyone really in the English-speaking, hardly anyone, I want to say, in the English-speaking world, whereby you had an authentic Palestinian voice that was actually pro-Palestine, but also against terrorism and Hamas, pro-peace and coexistence, and able to hold multiple truths. And that's where I decided to put myself out there.
Thank you for explaining that. That was incredibly insightful, and I appreciate it. It was super helpful, so thank you. You also answered a number of my questions in terms of how you arrived at this point, and so I want to move on. There are a number of things I want to discuss. One of the first ones is a couple weeks ago on your birthday, on April 24th. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
As a side note, today is my birthday, and I'm very blessed to be here with you on my birthday.
Right on. Well, thank you for a happy birthday, and thanks for sharing it with me.
Of course. So a couple weeks ago on your birthday, you made a handful of birthday wishes. I was hoping I could go through each wish individually and have you explain more in depth behind each one. Is that okay?
Certainly.
Okay. So I have direct quotes. Wish number 1. You said, I wish that we wouldn't be ruled by a ruthless terrorist organization, Hamas, that puts its needs and priorities ahead of its civilian population. Can you explain this, please?
Certainly. So unfortunately, a lot of people are still under the illusion that Hamas is representative of legitimate Palestinian interests, aspirations, goals, or objectives. There are still some under the illusion that Hamas is a form of organic resistance that emerged in response to injustices by the Israeli military occupation of the Gaza Strip and of the Palestinian territories. There are still those who believe that Hamas is an inseparable element of the Palestinian people, and that it is somehow, it was voted in, it has every right to be in charge of Gaza. They're not going anywhere. And therefore, we just need to accept that they will always be with us. And the truth couldn't be, this couldn't be further from the truth, to be honest with you, on multiple levels. Hamas is an abomination. Hamas Islamized an otherwise very secular society. Hamas, some of its first victims in the 1980s, were actually Palestinians, Palestinian women. They were throwing acid in their face to be modest and dress modestly. And they were executing suspected collaborators. Those are people that they suspected of working with the Israeli military or Israeli intelligence. This happened, before Hamas laid a finger on a single Israeli, it was literally brutalizing and killing Palestinians. Sinwar was in jail for killing Palestinians suspected of collaborating with Israel. He was not in jail for killing Israelis. And so Sinwar being the leader of Hamas, who is the mastermind of the October 7th massacre, and who has been since killed. So Hamas steals a lot of the foreign aid, stole a lot of the foreign aid, I should say, and redirected a lot of it over the 2 decades that it ruled Gaza to serve its members, to serve its needs. And then the humanitarian aid and the food that goes into Gaza. Part of why we have a serious hunger problem right now in Gaza is that they impose taxes on incoming aid. They force a lot of businesses to pay them taxes. They steal some of the aid and resell it. They have been heavy participants in a wartime economy that has brutalized the Palestinian people, that has worsened the hunger problem. They have refused to take serious actions to give up on some of their conditions to stop the war that they started. They started this war. There's a terrible set of talking points out there by the pro-Palestine industrial complex, and I'm using that deliberately as a derogatory term. Yes, I am being very derogatory in how I'm describing them as an industrial complex. Not all, obviously. Like I said, there's pro-Palestine and then there's, quote, pro-Palestine.
Right.
That, oh, this didn't begin on October 7th. This didn't start on October 7th. Well, geez, like, yes, of course, we know this didn't begin on October 7th. But the deadliest chapter of the Palestinian people's history that is qualitatively and quantitatively even more brutal than the Nakba itself began on October 7th. Over 2 million people have been displaced, and when in the Nakba, something like 750,000 Palestinians were displaced, and over 50,000 Palestinians were killed, and they would still be alive if Hamas had simply kept its soldiers at home on October 7th. So any way you slice and dice this, Hamas is a despicable terror organization that needs to go. There is no future for the Palestinian people or for the people of Gaza, further with Hamas in charge. Furthermore, Hamas empowers anti-Palestinian elements in the far right in Israel and in the extreme religious right in Israel, the Smotriches of the world, the Ben Gvirs of the world. Those are Israeli ministers in the current cabinet, which is the most extreme in Israeli history. And it's like Hamas handed our people on a silver platter to the most far-right government in Israel's history. That is not a government that cares. That is not a movement or a government or a group that cares for its people. Hamas has got to go. They are an abomination. They are not adequate. They do not represent the Palestinian people's interests, and they are not adequately called out by the pro-Palestine solidarity movement. And I think that's a problem.
Makes total sense. Thank you. Wish number 2. You said, and by the way, I know you'll be explaining a number of these things, so they'll sort of mix together. So if you ever feel like I already explained that, then we can move to the next one.
Certainly.
You said, wish number 2, I wish that we can have leaders who think about nation building and turning Gaza into the jewel of the Palestinian people rather than into a base for the so-called armed resistance, aka violent terrorism, that has squandered billions of dollars of our people's resources and got tens of thousands of our innocent civilians killed in unnecessary wars. I want to ask, how has Hamas squandered billions of dollars? Who's been giving them this money, and what has Hamas been doing with it?
Well, since 2005, the disengagement that took place, and again, there were issues with it. It was unilateral. It wasn't coordinated with the Palestinian Authority. It was done in a way that ultimately created a vacuum. However, I strongly believe that there was a missed opportunity on the Palestinian side to leverage the withdrawal in 2005 as an opportunity to create a role model for what an effective Palestinian form of self-governance looks like. Hamas abused that opportunity, abused the democratic process in 2006 by entering an election that was conditioned upon its renunciation of violence and upon its acknowledgement of Israel's existence. And it did neither. So that also killed the democratic there was a nascent democratic process that, albeit a procedural form of democracy that could have given rise to a regular democratic representative process to build up some form of representative governance in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, well-meaning international aid organizations, international donor nations, whether they be European or Arab or even parts of the United States, kept providing aid that was, yes, needed for the people of Gaza. But the way that Hamas treated that was, instead of actually deploying, I mean, it didn't have direct control over a lot of this aid. However, what this aid did is it allowed Hamas to abdicate responsibility to care for its people, to govern, to provide, and said, okay, the people of Gaza are the world's problem. Hamas, we're going to use our own resources, what Qatar gives us, what the Islamic Republic of Iran gives us, to build tunnels, to build rockets, to build a terror infrastructure, to turn Gaza into a terror base instead of a hub for technology, a hub for tourism, a hub for Palestinian manufacturing, the jewel of the Palestinian people, an example of what an occupation-free West Bank could look like. And when I say that, so many people are immediately, like, there's just an unwillingness to acknowledge any form of agency or responsibility or accountability on the part of a lot of Palestinian leadership. There is this belief, bolstered by a lot of, I think, folly academic theories and post-colonial thinking and just a whole bunch of word salads that have been remanufactured and reproduced, repurposed, to say that no matter what Palestinians do, they cannot be expected to be held accountable or have any agency. That there is no such thing as Palestinian agency or responsibility, because inherently they are victims of Israel's superiority and of Israel's oppression and of Israel's overwhelming advantages militarily, politically, geostrategically, diplomatically, and otherwise. And my whole thesis, like half of my raison d'etre, is that I actually think that's the bigotry of low expectations. I strongly believe that if you, within like, there's clearly an imbalance of power dynamics with Israel up here and the Palestinians being here. That said, I'm a strong believer that within said imbalance exists plenty of room and space for Palestinian agency and responsibility and accountability, and that's not being self-loathing or self-hating or blaming the victims. I actually think that's the first step to empowering the Palestinian people, such that you can look at something like October 7th. That was a choice. That was not a necessity. That was not an inevitability. There's something out there, and I want to write a piece. It's called, like, and I've spoken to it, the inevitability scam. And it's an academic and a commentator scam out there that says October 7th was inevitable. And I think absolutely not. October 7th was a choice by two psychopaths, by Sinwar and by Mohammed al-Deif. These two, religious, extremist, fanatical dudes within Hamas. Not even the entirety of Hamas, but these two hardliners basically launched a mini military coup against the rest of the group. They made a choice on behalf of over 2 million Palestinians. They made a choice that triggered the worst chapter in the Palestinian people's history. So that squandered all the tens of billions of dollars that have been cumulatively invested in Gaza over the past 20 years. That has squandered tens of thousands of lives, of Palestinian lives, that has set us back 100 years back, that has unleashed the wrath of, the most extreme and horrendous government in Israel's history that wants to push Palestinians out. Potentially, some Israeli ministers are calling for outright ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, and even other Israelis are saying this is disgusting. This is not our values. So, yes, I do speak about Israel. I do hold Israel accountable for a lot of actions, including the killing of my own family members, and we can talk about that. But I choose to focus on Hamas, and it's almost secondary to me to just regularly be criticizing Israel over and over and over. Where the gap is we need someone who can actually call out Hamas, who can actually call out Palestinian leadership failures, somebody who can look inwardly to say, guys, we have to clean house before we can say Israel this, Israel that. And yes, everything is connected, but how are we going to credibly stand before the international community and talk about a Palestinian state, which I want a Palestinian state. I want Palestinian sovereignty. I want Palestinian independence and liberty and freedom and self-determination. And also say that a Palestinian state will not pose a threat to our neighbors, that October 7th was a disaster, and that we do not see October 7th as something that will happen again from the West Bank. And instead, you have Hamas's goons saying we're going to do it again and again and again. And there's no recognition that that has to be addressed before we talk about Israel. So that's a long-winded way of explaining why I genuinely hold Palestinian leadership failures in contempt, and I hold them almost, I mean, not exclusively, but ultimately responsible for the disaster that we're in.
Let's talk about Israel now, because wish number 3, you said, I wish that the near future will have radically different Israeli leadership that doesn't use Hamas and use corrupt Palestinian leaders to keep our people divided. Because while I believe in agency, accountability, and responsibility of the Palestinian people, I also believe part of where we are at right now is due to choices by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government. I want to give you as much time as possible to explain what specifically has Bibi done and his government done to keep Palestinians divided, and what don't you like or agree with about the Israeli government?
Certainly. And this, I've never shied away from criticizing that. Some believe that because I'm very vehemently anti-Hamas, anti-Palestinian failures, that somehow I'm a shill for the Israeli government, or I'm a secret Mossad agent. You know, this Russian Iranian propaganda outlet wrote a hit piece on me saying,
really,
Israel pays me $30 million
shut up
to promote genocide. I mean, complete ludicrous.
I wish they saw the Uber that you were driving.
This morning. It wasn't, and me helping the Uber driver
fix the flat tire.
Fix the flat tire. Like, I didn't even have my own driver. It's pathetic. But my point is that it goes without saying that, of course, Israel as the superior party in this realm, like Israel's. There are multiple big picture changes that have happened in Israel. There has been a rightward shift among the electorate within Israel. And some of that, I actually think, is due to the violence of Islamists like Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But I also think some of that is due to the support of some of the extreme pro-settlement, pro-messianic kind of approaches that wanted to take Israel away from its secular character, if you will, and more into a religious outfit that is heavily ideologically oriented toward, what the West Bank, which they refer to as Judea and Samaria, that has to be retaken from the Palestinians. And that, I think, is part of where, unfortunately, there is Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, but there's also a larger force at play within Israeli electoral politics that has moved away from the possibility of the two-state solution, the radical pragmatism that I think we need. How has that manifested? So, for example, in 2007, when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, violently took over the Gaza Strip, there was a really unique opportunity. It was then controlled by, the Israeli government was controlled by Ehud Olmert. But nevertheless, I think the military establishment and the political echelons, if you will, there was a unique opportunity for the Israeli government to turn, to use the South North Korea model, such that the West Bank was run by Salam Fayyad, good, wonderful gentleman. I mean, it's rare to say that about a Palestinian politician, but someone whom I respect immensely, who cleaned out a lot of the corruption, who professionalized the Palestinian Authority and built institutions, and the security services were built in a way that really ensured some of the failures that happened in Gaza don't take place in the West Bank. And so instead of turning the West Bank into a successful South Korea and having Gaza become this isolated North Korea run by Hamas, and making it very clear for the Palestinians that this is your choice. Like, it would have been such an easy and compelling way to literally de-radicalize the entirety of the Palestinian national movement away from the armed resistance narrative, away from extremism, away from Hamas and the Iranian-led so-called axis of resistance. The so-called axis of resistance is when what the Islamic Republic of Iran invested in. It started with Shia militias in Iraq, and then in Syria with Bashar al-Assad, and then with Hezbollah in Lebanon, and then later on it included the Houthis in Yemen. And so instead of that, I think, unfortunately, and especially after Mr. Netanyahu came to power in 2009, there was the opposite. There was, the Palestinians are divided. Abbas has no legitimacy in Gaza. We can keep Hamas there indirectly. We can let the Qataris come in and rebuild Gaza, because the Qataris and Al Jazeera and the Muslim Brotherhood, the state of Qatar has its own unique orientation towards the Middle East, such that they do support Islamist groups. They do, and they have this contradictory policy where they host the biggest U.S. air base in the region. They're classified as a major non-NATO ally of the United States, but they also have supported Al-Qaeda and terrorists, and they've supported ISIS, and they've supported Hamas with billions of dollars, and they've supported all the Muslim Brotherhood and some horrendous people. So, like,
It makes no sense.
completely.
Yeah.
And they have a massive grip on policy in Washington,
Yeah.
where I live. I mean, so many think tanks that don't even want to criticize the Qataris, because the Qataris are, and the Qataris are in schools, and they indirectly invest in specific policy centers that then hold seminars and workshops. And so, like, they've had this long investment over a decade or so that is generating some of the troubling scenes I think we're seeing on college campuses with the pro-Palestine. I put a quote there for listeners, the pro-Palestine activism on college campuses. And so Netanyahu was happy for Qatar to play that role as an intermediary between Israel and Hamas, and to delegitimize the Palestinian Authority, expanding the settlement movement in the West Bank, expanding the military occupation of the West Bank, and the worsening of checkpoints and military control. And these checkpoints, what they do is they're a symbol for humiliation. They slow down or kill, in some instances, Palestinian local economies and hinder economic activities. They create resentment. The settlements, there's tiers of them. There are some settlers who are economic settlers, because there are government subsidies that incentivize people to move to parts of the West Bank. And then there are ideological settlers, and those tend to be a lot more violent, a lot more extreme, and especially in Hebron and in parts of Jerusalem, where they attack Palestinians, where they go into communities and they harass people with guns and with full protection of the IDF. And that is something that weakens the Palestinian Authority. It weakens the moderates. It allows Hamas and some of the elements of the violent pro-armed resistance folks to come in and say, oh, well, we are the natural antidote and alternative to that. So that, to me, is kind of the mortal sin, if you will, of Hamas in Gaza would not be where it's at without Qatari support and money, but also without a deliberate and explicit policy by Mr. Netanyahu to let them be entrenched, because he was under the belief that we have him contained, we have Gaza surrounded, we have Egypt having its own blockade and set of restrictions. We know we have all these intelligence assets, technological intelligence, human intelligence, We know what Hamas is up to. He figured that Hamas is going to be interested in just governing the Gaza Strip. And so there needs to be accountability for that. There needs to be, and that's not just me saying this, by the way. This is like even right-leaning folks in Israel. I meet with Israeli former former military commanders and political officials who decry what Netanyahu did, and knowing that Hamas was building 500 kilometers of tunnels under Gaza, and knowing that the Qataris every month were walking in with suitcases carrying anywhere from 20 to 35 million dollars every month. And we know that 1 month before October 7th, in September of 2023, he sent David Barnea, who is the head of Mossad, to Doha and asked the Qataris to please continue providing finances to Hamas, because he was facing internal problems with all the mass protests following the judicial overhaul that was controversial in Israel. And he was desperately trying to keep things stable in Gaza and not have any active conflicts so that he could score the Saudi-Israeli normalization, which was seen as the crown jewel of the Abraham Accords expansion and Israel's regional integration. And I support Saudi-Israeli normalization as something that actually could benefit the Palestinians immensely. And I have a variety of plans that could build off of that. But I think, again, to view the Palestinian divisions politically in a vacuum and strictly as a matter of an internal Palestinian dynamic and politics without understanding the meddling that the Israeli government, particularly that of Netanyahu and some of the folks that have been around him now for over 15 years, is a mistake.
I think what you've outlined, especially in regard to how, and we'll talk more about it, how not all Palestinians at all support Hamas. Equally, not all Israelis support what the Israeli government does.
Exactly.
And it's so easy to just lump Palestinians into one group and Israelis into one group.
Precisely.
But as you know, I mean, the pre-October 7 and even now, like, Israel was on the brink of a potential civil war with the elections and people not agreeing with what the Israeli government is doing. And I think if we're going to continue these conversations or engagements and really have a legitimate chance at peace, we need to separate governments from the people.
Precisely.
And I think you've done a wonderful job of that. And in the same way that you are very clear in your stance, like anti-Hamas and denouncing the evil and atrocities they've done, I think the pro-Israel crowd needs to be very loud and very aware of the faults of their own government. And so that we can come and meet in the middle to understand that it's not just one side, like they are both playing a part.
Certainly. And I would extend that to even some aspects of the current war and how it has, I mean, believe me, no one wants to see Hamas gone from Gaza as much as I and many Gazans want, many actual Gazans on the ground want. Forget what angry college students or angry Palestinians or Arabs or Muslims in the diaspora think. I actually genuinely really only care about the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
And so that said, there have been numerous mistakes. I mean, there's a reason why coming up on 20 months later, we're still stuck in this war without, Hamas is severely degraded. Hamas is severely weakened. But Gaza's like extremely damaged and destroyed. The amount of unnecessary death and destruction, ways in which more hostages could have been released, ways in which a transitional or a series of transitional periods could have been enacted that may have gradually and slowly allowed for a post-Hamas world that may not have entailed a kinetic element, but may have allowed for a combination of an international and a regional peacekeeping force with some elements of the PA, with some elements of a locally stood up militia that the Palestinians themselves can form to actually fight off Hamas, and not what Netanyahu wanted, which was an individual clan to be armed that allowed Hamas to pick them off one by one very quickly. You need infrastructure to support Palestinians rising up against Hamas, not using the anti-Hamas protests, the mass tens of thousands that have happened since March, several bouts of them in northern Gaza, and many of whom I've talked to, some of whom I've had the blessing and privilege of providing support to and backing to, and going to Congress and asking them to support them, going to Arab officials at the highest level and saying, use those true freedom fighters in Gaza wanting to be liberated from Hamas's despicable grip as a way to come out publicly and say Hamas has got to go. The Arab world has not yet formally come out and said Hamas has got to go because they have hostile populations incited by Al Jazeera, incited by jihadi propaganda. So the critique of the Israeli government, I think, goes beyond just acknowledging that Netanyahu and his interests have prolonged this war. There are horrendous mistakes and horrendous atrocities that have taken place in this war that I think have eroded Israel's international standing, have eroded possibilities for true transformation in Gaza that gets rid of Hamas once and for all, based on a small number of far-right ministers that really had this ideological belief that we could use this atrocity of October 7th as a way, almost a smokescreen to get rid of Palestinians in Gaza and push them onto Egypt. And then what did Egypt do? They built 3 Berlin walls, and the people of Gaza are paying the price for that. But to that point as well, I have made a point, a really critical point of connecting with Israeli hostage families, with survivors of October 7th, with freed hostages, with families of hostages who are currently being held in Gaza. And actually, the tragedy of the destruction of my family home, the loss of so many of my immediate and extended family members, my 12-year-old niece, Farah, my uncle, Riyadh, my dad's youngest brother, all of my mom's family was practically wiped out. My uncle Abdullah, my aunt Zainab, my cousin Yahya, my cousin Heba, all of these incredible people that had nothing to do with Hamas. We've done, the New York Times did an investigation. Foreign Policy asked questions. The even Amnesty International, a group that I'm not exactly in love with, did an investigation as well. And we gave the IDF coordinates and locations and like specific times, and said, can you just tell me like what happened with this airstrike? Like why did these 3 airstrikes take place and kill 33 of my own family members? We got nothing, man.
Nothing.
So that's the heartbreak. However, within that, I tell people that even within the aforementioned, I'm not going to treat every single Israeli, every single person, just because they happen to be a Jewish Israeli, as somehow responsible for the actions of their government. In the same way that I don't want every single Palestinian in Gaza to be treated as if they're responsible for Hamas's massacres on October 7th. And it's really sad and I think unfortunate that some people have a double standard.
Correct.
They want that extended to the Palestinians, but not to the Israelis. And they think it's okay to show up to random Israelis at a restaurant when they speak Hebrew and just shout them down and chase them out and say, genocide promoters aren't welcome here, or war criminals aren't welcome here. And I have made a point of saying that is actually a form of dehumanization that is incredibly unhelpful. I have said, when people are like, well, Israelis don't view us as human beings, I said, no, some elements of Israelis may dehumanize and do dehumanize the Palestinian people. And guess what? Some elements of our own people, unfortunately, dehumanize the Israelis, such that you normalize the act of killing Vivian Silver and peace activists on October 7th as a legitimate act of resistance. So dehumanization is part of the human condition, is something that all humans are capable of doing. It is not something that is strictly, the exclusive domain of Israelis. And that's why when I promote empathy and kindness and mutual understanding and humanity. That's not kumbaya. That's not nice sounding words that, make Israelis go, oh, this is actually a mutually beneficial framework that can help our people.
Completely agree. Dehumanization is a way to justify killing innocent people. We've seen it all throughout history, and we see it now. When you can dehumanize someone, make them seem less than human, you make them seem evil, then you can justify doing horrific things to them.
Precisely.
And I think people on both sides need to be aware of that. And I do think that people on both sides are aware of it, but the ones who are the loudest voices, the ones who have the most extreme views, they get more press. And especially in today's social media economy, the things that get more likes and views and clicks are the more extremist views, unfortunately.
Precisely. And I noticed that on social engagements and what content gets more engagement versus what content is not as attractive.
Correct.
Peace and healing and reconciliation are not particularly
exciting.
Exactly, because it says, it doesn't say, resist and kill and sabotage and vandalize.
Yes.
But I'm not out there. This isn't a likability contest for me. And thankfully, there are enough of us interested in these engagements and in exchanges.
Wish number 4, and again, if there's anything like I've already spoken about that, feel free to tell me. But wish number 4, you said, I wish people would better understand the roots of Hamas, the roots of Islamism, the roots of the jihadi-inspired armed resistance. Remember, Hamas started in the 80s by attacking women and throwing acid in their faces so they would cover up, and by killing innocent Palestinians suspected of being collaborators with Israel. That's how Hamas began. And I wanted to ask you, when you say this, is this, in your mind, are you speaking to the pro-Palestine crowd of violent protesters on the streets and on college campuses who think Hamas are the good guys?
Yes. I mean, we've addressed this a little bit earlier, but unfortunately, this speaks to the people who think Hamas is an organic expression of resistance. And this is my desire, is to let them know that if you're a believer in intersectionality and in women's rights and in immigrant rights and in LGBT issues and in reproductive rights, and somehow you're able to, not understand that Hamas, goes in complete opposition to all of the aforementioned by virtue of their framing, by virtue of their roots, understanding the Muslim Brotherhood and how the Muslim Brotherhood as a core idea that then had a bunch of deviations, some of which led to Hamas, some of which led to Al-Qaeda, some of which have led to an even horrendous mutation like ISIS, then you don't really know what you're talking about. And to think of Hamas as a pure, as long as there's occupation, there will always be Hamas. I actually, on its surface, that sounds reasonable, but if you actually understand it, what is resistance? Resistance isn't Hamas and tunnels and rockets and this. Resistance is, some Palestinians view their mere existence as a form of resistance, persevering on their land as a form of resistance, being able to nation build. That's something that I was talking about earlier, going from resistance to coexistence and nation building and persevering. That is something that I want the pro-Palestine community in the diaspora to understand. Because guess what? The people of Gaza, if you go right now and talk to most people in Gaza about Hamas and they're an organic resistance and they're the heroes and they're this and that, they're not going to hear you. So there's a disconnect between people on the ground and the people abroad who are claiming to be angry on behalf of the Gazans.
Makes total sense. This one I'm very interested to hear. Wish number 5, you said, I wish to be a part of the rejuvenation, the renaissance, and the reconstitution of the Gaza Strip, and that my people can finally have a fair shot and chance at living the life they so desperately yearn for and deserve, away from Hamas's grip and away from violent Islamism. My question is, what does a rejuvenated Gaza Strip look like to you? Who governs it? Who lives there? How does that work?
Certainly. And I'm humble enough to acknowledge there are a lot of things that I'm not certain on what exactly that entails. I have ideas. I have thoughts. I think about this all day, every day. I have numerous conversations with people. I've written things. There are a lot of things that I've written that are not shared in the public in the sense that I want to get feedback and thoughts. So one project that I'm working on right now is that I want to build an artificial peninsula off the coast of central Gaza using all the rubble and to place a small airfield on it and 2 docks on it to basically have a small airport and a seaport.
Going into the sea?
Yes.
Okay.
A peninsula that is connected to the land, not an island, which is something that current Israeli defense minister Israel Katz has wanted to do many years ago, like 10 years ago. But this would be cheaper. This would be something that can be done quickly. And this would be done in phases so that you don't just dump a lot of money into it, but rather is something that is used to prove concept and to show that it can work. But this is about access in and out of Gaza through a non-Israeli and a non-Egyptian portal, with full fulfillment of security requirements by Israel, certainly, and with international supervision and management, certainly U.S. involvement, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, moderate Arab states, private enterprise. This is not charity. I want to move away from charity and move towards a gradual form of, social enterprise, private enterprise. What this will do is it'll revolutionize access to and from Gaza using airspace and using Gaza's territorial waters. Gaza is strategic in that it overlooks the Mediterranean. This will allow for the movement of people in and out of the coastal enclave as the first step in this rejuvenation. 70 to 80% of Gazans have never left the Gaza Strip. They've not seen the outside world except through the screens of their cell phones. Imagine the potential for transformation that when we talk about de-radicalization, and I care about de-radicalization, though I want to do it as de-radicalization is often mentioned in a very counterterrorism context and just like I'm here, you're this radical little creature, and let me fix you, let me just de-radicalize you. And I want to put a positive spin, if you will, because I actually believe that on de-radicalization as something that is incredibly positive and powerful and empowering. De-radicalization as a way to unlock human potential in Gaza, and human capital. De-radicalization as a way to unleash Gaza's transformation, nation building. De-radicalization as a way to end violence and to end the cycles of violence in the Strip and to begin the journey of building and to begin doing what Gaza should have been 20 years ago. I believe that Gaza should be a semi-autonomous statelet, if you will, that is part of an umbrella Palestinian state. But the idea that there's going to be a centralized Palestinian state or a Palestinian government, rather, with based in Ramallah, that's going to administer Gaza, I don't really see that. I believe that there needs to be a provisional, semi-independent structure in the Gaza Strip that allows for the Strip reaching its full potential. Part of this peninsula, however, that I want to build, it's not just a piece of infrastructure. I want to create a corridor that connects it to Saudi Arabia and to the Emirates with rail, with an oil pipeline, with fiber optics. How about we put data centers in Gaza? How about we actually put people to work there? The relatively speaking, labor market in Gaza is affordable for a lot of enterprise. I want to use that seaport in there to eventually include an oil terminal so that the Saudis and the Emiratis could potentially export that oil onto European markets and using Gaza as a hub. And yes, there's IMEC that's being put out there, the India Middle East corridor, that is an alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative that the Chinese are putting out there. And there could be different iterations of it, but I want to connect Gaza to the outside world.
Yeah.
I want to connect it to European energy markets. I want to connect it to the and again, this has to work for all Gazans. This cannot be a form of crony capitalism that only works for a small number of oligarchs. And we do have a class of Palestinian oligarchs, mainly based in the West Bank. And Hamas has built their own mini oligarchs as well. And that is not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in uplifting those poor people so that they're not wasting away in crowded refugee camps, even rethinking how do we build those refugee camps? How do we build, even thinking, do we actually change the framing? Are we going to be perpetually refugees in our own country? Maybe it's time that we shed this notion of us being perpetual refugees and this issue of the right of return that most in Gaza know is not going to happen. There's not going to be the return of millions of Palestinian descendants of refugees and refugees to mainland Israel. And the right of return needs to happen to a Palestinian state. And so this rejuvenation of Gaza is the totality of the access and infrastructure meets economic recovery away from perpetual aid dependency and NGOs. And yes, NGOs and aid will have to be a component at the beginning, but I don't want Gaza to be aid dependent forever. This will converge with an ethos of Palestinian nationhood. What does it mean to be a Palestinian from Gaza? Do we get rid of this notion that, I want to be a Gazan. I don't want to be a Gazan asterisk who's a refugee.
Right.
We can have a sense of heritage to the old land, but this is where radical pragmatism means that we are now in Gaza. Gaza's our home. Gaza's not a launching pad for going to Jerusalem. I mean, we should visit Jerusalem, visit Israel, and visit the West Bank, but there's no more warfare. There's no more, this is our home. There's no more conquest. There's no more battling. There's, again, going from the resistance narrative to the coexistence narrative that then enables nation building.
You had said something that I thought was very interesting. All that was very interesting. But there was one thing in particular you said about the government. I believe your words were a provisional, semi-independent government. Is that correct?
Yes. So what I didn't address in particular is that I don't know, and it's difficult because I have conversations all the time with all sorts of policymakers, and I believe in a transitional government. I believe in something that could include outside powers, but the Palestinians have to be, particularly from Gaza, have to be involved. I do think some elements of the Palestinian Authority have to be involved, even if nominally. But I believe that a provisional government that ushers in, Gaza's recovery is what's needed. I don't believe, and certainly nothing even remotely close to any Hamas involvement in the government.
Do you believe Israel... I'll frame it differently. Do you see Israel having a role in the creation of this, or do you think Israel should be separate entirely? Like, how do you see, in your eyes, in an ideal world, this playing out?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the current Israeli government is part of, I think, the mess that has gotten us to this place where we're no closer to some sort of an alternative that can hold areas freed from Hamas's presence. So I actually strongly believe that no credible or legitimate Palestinian alternative to Hamas will emerge under Israeli control, or the perception that they're a subcontractor of the Israelis. So I understand that Israel has security interests in Gaza, and I think that can be separated from what the political endgame looks like, and it should be separated, and Israel should remain out of the governance question in Gaza as long as there are security arrangements in place through third parties.
Oh, interesting.
I think, for example, there needs to be a three-tiered approach to security.
Okay.
For example, I want, with U.S. with a U.S. umbrella, I want there to be an international and regional peacekeeping force that has U.S. involvement and some infusion of private security. The Israelis trust the Americans, both officially and from a private security point of view. That's why they had American companies operate the Netzarim corridor during the 50-day ceasefire. Then you bring in elements of the Palestinian Authority. You bring in 5,000 Jordanian and Egyptian trained with U.S. supervision, Palestinian Authority security personnel with light arms that can go into Gaza, that can hold areas, with some of them having very specialized training to be able to then activate the third component of the security vision that I have, which is locally stood up militias that are like the awakening councils in Iraq, the Sons of Iraq. Those are General David Petraeus in 2007 in Iraq, when the insurgency was at its highest. He worked with local tribes and local councils to set up basically a local militias made up of the local communities, and actually was paying people salaries, monthly salaries, to be a part of these militias to chase out Al-Qaeda, to chase out the militants. And some of these militias were actually former Al-Qaeda guys themselves, former tribesmen who were former Al-Qaeda, but then because they had been in the Iraqi military, and when that was disbanded, they lost their jobs, so they engaged in an insurgency. That's a concern that I have about some of Hamas's civil servants, or some of Hamas's remnants of their professional, their non-terror arms, if you will. So a combination of local families, local communities, you create some vetting mechanisms. And again, light arms with some communication equipment, some command structure under the Palestinian Authority, pay the monthly salaries, and then with the promise that when we've accomplished our missions in these various areas, you will be integrated, you will be further professionalized and integrated into the newly emergent Palestinian security forces in Gaza. So you go from being a local militia that's fighting Hamas, that's preventing them from coming in, that's using your local intelligence, your local know-how, you know all your neighbors, you know who's who, you might be able to go house to house looking for tunnel shafts, searching around, finding whatever. Those are going to be some of the people that might do the heavy lifting of some of the counterterrorism component, better than the international peacekeeping force or the Arab peacekeeping force, and certainly better than the Palestinian Authority forces. So that's how they become force multipliers, and you replicate them, and before you know it, you have a force of 20 to 30 to 40,000 security personnel that are running the Gaza Strip. So that's an entirely solvable problem. But there's a lack of creativity, a lack of the willingness to try different things, a lack of really understanding how Gaza operates, a lack of a willingness to understand different models. And like, I'm looking at Bosnia and Kosovo, for example, for the international model. I'm looking at what the Saudis and the Emiratis did in Bahrain in 2011, or in Yemen in 2015. I'm not talking about right or wrong. I'm simply just looking at the military intervention. And then I'm looking at what the United States did in 2007 with General David Petraeus. What is the goal of all of this? The goal of all of this is to spare Palestinian lives, is to stop the killing, is to get Israel to not... My number one priority is I don't want perpetual Israeli direct military occupation and the prospect of Jewish only settlements in the Gaza Strip, which is what some of the far right element in Israel are kind of, dreaming of right now. And if it's going to take this provisional approach, then honestly, so be it.
Yeah.
And that's where I can see myself as being involved in the strategy of and hope to be in service of Gaza in terms of this strategy and how you actually reimagine what's possible in the Gaza Strip.
You just said something, and you said it so nonchalantly, I think some people might skip over it. You said you don't want there to be Jewish-only settlements in the Gaza Strip. Are you, in your ideal vision, of the Gaza Strip, do you see Jews living there as well in a potential a Palestinian state under Palestinian law, but Jews being able to live there, or would you prefer it just be Palestinian?
Well, I'm being pragmatic about the near future.
Correct. Yep.
And Jewish-only settlements, unfortunately, the way they have been executed in the West Bank has been an extremely traumatic experience for the Palestinian people.
Yep.
The way that Smotrich and Ben Gvir have talked about is we want to push the Palestinians out. We want to make life miserable so that they engage in voluntary migration so that we can have settlements. Because when I say Jewish-only settlements, I realize a lot of people don't even understand what settlements really mean.
Yes.
So these people are talking about having Jewish-only settlements coming in and then having all these elaborate perimeters around them by the IDF that would require permanent military occupation of the. And actually, just to digress for a second, the term occupation sometimes is used nebulously by some people. Some elements of the pro-Palestine community believe that all of Israel is a form of occupation. I don't subscribe. I mean, the reality is my grandparents were pushed out in 1948 from what is now mainland Israel. However, Israel is a sovereign, internationally recognized state. Borders change. Borders have, and Israel is a state that exists. What I call the occupation is the military occupation of now the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. That is what I'm referring to. So, yes, I have long said, for example, in the West Bank, I think if I were a Palestinian president, I would actually say for some of these settlers that are incredibly unhelpful. Well, there's tiers of the settlers. Some of these violent settlers, I don't care; they have to go. Mm-hmm. The economic settlers, I would actually say that you can be a Palestinian citizen and live under Palestinian laws, and we will grant you protection, we will grant you safety, but you are now going to live in the state of Palestine. Here's how that would unfold. Here are some troubleshooting mechanisms. Here's how, and work toward that goal or work backwards toward that goal.
Full rights.
Precisely. In the same way that you have Palestinians living inside of Israel. So in the Gaza Strip, however, I mean, we're talking, unfortunately, decades before we have a scenario, which is sad because in the 90s and 80s,
so close.
It was so close, and Jewish Israelis were regularly going into Gaza, not just the settlements, but in like other parts of the Gaza Strip. So I aspire toward that, and I know the limits of where we're at right now. I know that if it were up to me, I would want there to be a Palestine and an Israel, but I would want there to be full cooperation and integration. I'm not a one-stater. I don't believe in one state. I believe there needs to be two separate spaces for two separate national nations to express two distinct national identities. And I think where possible, we could have space for collaboration and cooperation. And where necessary, we need to acknowledge that there's going to be a separation, or what some Israelis have been increasingly using the term since October 7th is a divorce. And that's, but I assure you that there are many Palestinians, including in Gaza, who over time would actually welcome the opportunity of greater cooperation and collaboration with Israelis on economic matters, on educational matters, healthcare.
Yes.
And again, that happened even while Hamas was in control. There were Palestinians from Gaza going into Israel, going into for work, going into Jerusalem, going into parts of the West Bank to do joint and even going into like the Negev for some collaborative agricultural projects.
If you were Israel, and I obviously use Israel broadly, but we'll say if you were within the Israeli government, and obviously this is all hypothetical, but let's say you're in that situation, and you you're you. You're in you're not the right wing government. You're not the extremist right wing government. You're you. How do you act as an Israeli to make this happen? What would your steps be as to collaborate, to be a teammate, to help make this actually become a reality? Not tomorrow, but over the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. What do you do to make this happen?
Well, actually, let's talk about some, I think, low-hanging fruit.
Okay.
I genuinely think, and as much as I despise elements of the Palestinian Authority, I would make clear. So let's talk about Gaza and a little bit about the West Bank. I would make clear that I am willing to allow elements of the Palestinian Authority to go into the Gaza Strip as part of a broad international framework, because we need to have, international guarantees, international involvement in Gaza as part of the provisional period. Israel does not intend to permanently occupy the Gaza Strip. Israel is going to clear some areas and then gradually turn them over to a mix of the Palestinian Authority and Arabs and international peacekeeping forces, with U.S. involvement and supervision as part of a transitional period. I would make it clear that Israel is not intent on ethnically cleansing Gaza. Israel does not want to forcibly push the people of Gaza out, and that Israel wishes for there to be no more terrorism or jihadi extremism or Hamas violence in Gaza, but that it wishes to see Gaza developed, evolved, and part of a future Palestinian state. Actually say that. That guarantees the rights of Israelis to safety and security, while giving Palestinians their separate space to choose the kind of government and society they want to build. As long as it doesn't harm Israel, that's their choice. Low-hanging fruit. I would immediately, and I've spoken to folks, who have had these conversations within the security establishment, I would immediately deploy IDF resources and Shin Bet resources to rein in the violent settlers in the West Bank that are constantly, on a daily basis, with full videos and full documentation, terrorizing Palestinians, burning cars, burning orchards, killing livestock, shooting Palestinians in some cases, attacking people in their homes, terrorizing people for the goal of pushing them out. People who are just truly vile human beings that are not even representative of other Israelis find them like truly despicable.
Yeah.
Rein those people in, because what those people are doing, not only is it deadly business, but it's unnecessarily radicalizing Palestinians in the West Bank. Where possible, where doable. And I've spoken to like a senior U.S. military official who works with the Israelis to advise them on security matters, and how the U.S. has been pressuring the Israeli military to lower the number of checkpoints that they, and it's literally a numbers game. It's like a data game. And not all checkpoints are created equal. Some are just ones that are stood up on the spot. Some are ones that are makeshift. Some are ones that are newly erected. Some are ones that are long established. So there's tiers of them. But again, looking for low-hanging fruit, make life easier for the Palestinian people. Just immediate steps. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to lower the tensions. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to benefit from the fact that we have a new administration in the United States that is pushing for Saudi-Israeli normalization. I'm trying to just lower the temperature. Jordan just banned the Muslim Brotherhood. Let me help the Jordanians on this side of the river. Hezbollah is in hibernation. We're striking if they want to rearm, whatever. But let's let in some, let's expedite the aid into Gaza, because there really is unequal distribution of the access to food where there is outright actual hunger. Is it famine? Maybe not quite that level, but there really genuinely is real hunger in the Gaza Strip. So you bring the temperature down, and then you actually start doing what all the Arabs are desperate for Israel to do. The Arabs being the like moderate Arab states, you know, the Jordans and Egypts and the United Arab Emirates and the Saudis and and the Emiratis and all the others who are eager to bolster relations with Israel, to normalize relations with Israel, to form that new alliance that is creates space for economic integration and reformulates the security architecture to contain Iran and Iranian aggression, particularly if they really keep going with their nuclear program. What does that entail? What the Saudis have been saying over and over: a clear, irreversible pathway with milestones, an agreed upon timeline for a Palestinian state. Now, I understand many in Israel feel that after October 7th, it was the final nail in the coffin. That I've talked to numerous Israelis who feel like, well, wouldn't that be rewarding Hamas for the terrorism that a Palestinian state emerged after October 7th? To which I would say Hamas never believed in the two-state solution.
Correct.
Hamas worked to undermine the two-state solution. Hamas conducted suicide bombings and killed Palestinian Authority officials and killed Fatah and pushed them out of Gaza to stop this two-state solution. And Abbas and the Palestinian Authority and Jordan and Egypt and others have been eager to try to make this work for years. And when President Obama, regardless of what folks think of him, he tried twice for a serious push to really make something happen, and it didn't work. I think it was a mistake for the Palestinians not to use Trump's deal of the century as merely a starting point for negotiations and to just immediately say no and cut off relations. I think that was a grave mistake, and they realized that in Ramallah and President Abbas and all those. So I dispute the notion that a Palestinian state has to, by default, mean a reward for Hamas or becomes a natural hub for terrorism against Israel. It doesn't have to be that way. And certainly, if Israel has learned from Netanyahu's terrible experience, maybe let's not let billions of dollars worth of Qatari cash go into the hands of the very terrorists that ended up attacking us. This is Ehud Barak, former prime minister, saying it. This is Olmert saying it. This is top Israeli Mossad, Shin Bet, top generals saying that Netanyahu fed the monster and the monster backfired and destroyed us. So I believe there is low-hanging fruit. I can't look into the future. I can't even imagine what we're going to look like 10 years from now. But I feel so strongly in the same way that on the Palestinian side, as grim and terrible as the picture is, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing and coming out here and traveling if I didn't see an opportunity for Gaza's rejuvenation and transformation. If I didn't see a chance for finally breaking the shackles of Hamas, of the armed resistance narrative, of the Palestinian phoenix literally rising out of the Gaza ashes. Like, I genuinely believe that. Equally, I genuinely believe that Israel has all the economic, political, military cards. Israel is in a very good position to make what some would call compromises, in quotes, what I would call strategic choices that optimize for an exponentially better pathway. I'm not going to say outcome because I think it's a better outcome, but I'm not a prophet. All sorts of things could happen and derail it. But I think as strategic choices that optimize for an infinitely and an exponentially better pathway and potential outcomes, like stabilizing the West Bank, reversing some of the settlement activities and violence, stabilizing Gaza, planting seeds for stability and transformation in Gaza, creating that pathway to Palestinian statehood in pursuit I mean, Israel has a chance that it hasn't had in 7 decades, which is some of the biggest Muslim and Arab countries like Saudi Arabia. And the Indonesians are right behind Saudi Arabia. I talked to some Indonesians and some of the religious organizations. The Indonesians are very ready to normalize right behind Saudi Arabia. And if and you have the Moroccans already and the Emirates and the Egyptians, you could get elements of the Sudanese after the end of I mean, this started before the civil war. If you get Algeria, if you get Libya, if you get Syria, Syria is I think, potentially the next frontier. Lebanon, endless possibilities. So I implore the Israeli leadership, and I implore those who are pro-Israel to break out of these in the same way we have unhelpful narratives on the pro-Palestine side. There are unhelpful narratives on the pro quote unquote pro-Israel side. There's pro-Israel and then there's pro-Israel. To really see the immense opportunities ahead and to not fall down for, well, the Palestinians are just going to perpetually hate Israel. Well, they're always going to kill Jews. Well, there's always going to be violent Palestinians. There's always going to be hateful Palestinians. Just like there's always going to be violent Jews, or Israelis. There's always going to be hateful Israeli. Like there's going to be 20 to 30% of both populations that are potentially irredeemable. But I think those people can be bypassed entirely and controlled and isolated or treated as merely a group that doesn't need to ruin it for the 70% other ones that really would benefit immensely from this.
That makes total sense. It's very interesting. Let me ask you a question. You said something about the checkpoints, and I'm imagining speaking with my Israeli friends, my Israeli family. I don't know any Israeli who disagrees with that. They want more freedom of movement, especially in the West Bank and in Gaza, for fewer checkpoints and freedom of movement in and out. The major concern, obviously, is their safety and security. How do we reconcile reducing checkpoints while also guaranteeing the safety of Israelis, including Arab Israelis, and not just Jewish Israelis, but all Israeli citizens from potential terrorist attacks coming out of the West Bank or Gaza?
Certainly. So putting Gaza aside, because it's not really there. I mean, the checkpoint system, Gaza is really more of a security perimeter around. So specific to the West Bank, I mean, a lot of these checkpoints are deep within the West Bank, deep within Palestinian territories. And some of them are set up around or nearby settlements of different sizes. And again, not all settlements are created equal. Some are tiny ones, some are outposts, some are like outright called illegal outposts that the Israeli military, it's too much even for the IDF, and we'll go and take them down. Some are sprawling communities. So a lot of Palestinians would say, why should we suffer from these checkpoints to protect what we believe are illegal settlements? Settlements that just were created over the last decade or two. Settlements that are deep in our territory. Settlements that cut off our communities. Settlements that prevent the establishment of a contiguous Palestinian state. So there's a fundamental question that I think should be wrestled with, and it can be uncomfortable for some Israelis to face this. Some will feel that, well, this really is Jewish land and we have a right to it. And then I would say, well, then what is left for the Palestinians to have a state if we are truly pushing for the two-state solution? Are we just going to end up in a one-state reality, which I think would be detrimental for Israel far more, for a Jewish democratic Israel far more than for the Palestinian people? Another way is that, okay, then why not coordinate with some of the Palestinian Authority officials or automate some of these processes or have Palestinians be involved in some of their security? This designation of Area A, Area B, but we're going to call it A and B, but like we're actually going to go anywhere we want. Like some of that, I think there has to be an outgrowth of that process, and to give Palestinian security forces more authority, more autonomy. And guess what? Palestine, as certified by the United States and senior officials within the IDF and within the Shin Bet, Palestinian security services in the West Bank are stunningly effective at preventing Iranian meddling every day they uncover. And this is me as somebody who's not shilling for the Palestinian Authority. I want to be clear, and I've called them out on their corruption. But I'm just saying, in the absence of an alternative, they have literally on a daily basis stopped numerous interventions and attempts to intervene by Iran.
That's something I haven't heard.
Yes, but Palestinian intelligence service by sending in money, particularly in the northern part of the West Bank, where in around Nablus, Jenin, Tulkarm, some of those areas that we've had some of the issues there. So I think there's a way in which Israeli security doesn't have to happen at the expense of Palestinian freedom and dignity and the ability to build a life. And the sad thing is, when something happens with like a shooter incident or whatever, I see in Arabic social media, Arabic's my favorite language, like I said, and I see in Arabic social media an avalanche of local Palestinians who have to face the consequences saying, damn you, whoever did this. Because now the army is going to come in and do 1, 2, 3, 4. Like what did we gain? Like, what did we achieve from this? So there has to also be a way to capitalize upon this sentiment of the average Palestinian who genuinely does not want there to be violence, but also doesn't want to be subjected to daily humiliation by a bunch of 18 and 19-year-old IDF soldiers right next to their home, asking, why is there an Israeli checkpoint in the heart of my community?
That's fair. That's totally fair. And that's really good to hear, because that's especially in terms of the effectiveness of their security forces. I hadn't heard of that. So that's very hopeful. We have one more wish that you had for your birthday. I know we went off on a deviation, but I really wanted to hear a lot about these views for the future. So one more wish, and then I have some other questions as well. Are we good on time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm really enjoying this.
Likewise. Likewise. I appreciate it. And feel free to cut me off if you want shorter answers.
I'm never going to cut you off.
Okay.
I want you to speak uninterrupted, and I really enjoy hearing you speak. So I'm not going to cut you off.
Right on.
Wish number 6. You said, I wish people would educate themselves on the roots of Hamas and Islamism, and please avoid propaganda of all types, pro-Israel and pro-Palestine, so we can move away from polarization and move towards cooperation and collaboration. My question is, where, and this was, a lot of people asked me this on Instagram. They said, where do you recommend people get their information from? And where do you recommend they not get their information from? How do they know what's true and what's false? And we'll obviously put all of your information in the show notes so they can follow you. But it is a very difficult world to navigate in terms of who to know, who to follow, where to get information from. Do you have any recommendations to help people with this?
Well, I feel strongly, what I always say is that it's less so about the source of information sometimes as much as it is about how, it's less so about what to think, but how to think. I can watch Al Jazeera. I can watch Fox News. I can watch Israeli Channel 14 and Channel 12. I can listen to Yedot Ahronot, Ynet, and I can watch Haaretz podcasts. I can read anything I want and actually be able to tell what is information, what is analysis, what is opinion, what is conjecture. And I think that's the key issue right here is you can look for the information and still not like the analysis or the opinion or the conjecture or the overall editorial line that is a website called Middle East Eye.
Okay.
That I think before October 7th used to be somewhat interesting to watch. Right now they have mostly anti-Israel, tangentially pro-Hamas, and really just in my opinion, anti-Western points of views that are kind of fuel for a lot of the discourse. And so it has gotten to the point, honestly, where I don't, for the most part, when I look at a lot of their information, a lot of their content, whether it be shorts or whether it be posts, it's mainly not information. It's mainly opinions. It's mainly their analysis that is leading in a certain direction. And it's good to sometimes hear differing opinions, but I genuinely no longer see like raw information. I want raw information. Sometimes I want to make my own assessments. Sometimes I want to hear how other people are analyzing the information. So I'm not going to sit here and give you a bunch of sources and lists, but what I will say is skepticism is good. Excessive skepticism can lead to neurotic doubts that honestly I've seen, whereby in the pro-Palestine community, there's an unwillingness to acknowledge that Hamas committed horrendous atrocities, and that even though Hamas literally has their GoPros and all the videos are out there for all to see, they think that Israel's Hannibal directive and Israel's the only one who killed. And there might have been Israelis killed by their own fire, but multiple things can be true. That may have happened, but to say Hamas killed no one and all civilians were killed just by Israeli fire is like ridiculous. Similarly, you can't put out any video of atrocities in Gaza or horrible violence in Gaza without an army of pro-Israel accounts responding to me on Twitter with like, this seems fake. The sun seems to have risen from the southwest, not from the east. This is a sniper. Well, how about maybe Hamas snipers did that? Maybe like it's all this cognitive dissonance to say the IDF would never do something horrible or would never do a mistake. And then literally it's like 2 days later, the IDF is like, oh yeah, we mistakenly killed a bunch of people. Oh yeah, we did this and we did that. Or yeah, this happened, or, you know. So that has more to do with priming and the way people think. Mm-hmm. And that's what colleges are failing to do, is to teach people how to think.
Correct.
Rather than what to think. So I consume a lot of information. I mean, I do like some information on the mainstream outlets like the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, for example. They have some interesting reporting and stories. I do like some random, like sometimes the Financial Times will come up. Sometimes the New York Times might have some stories, but I can also in the big ones, including the New York Times, I can totally see sometimes the skewing of narratives and why they have, you know, like the news side of the New York Times has published a lot of pieces. Yep. Like has included me rather in a lot of their information and pieces, but the opinion side, they've never wanted to publish me because I don't fit the narrative that is desired.
You're not anti-Israel enough for them.
I didn't.
You didn't say it.
So similarly, I think some Israeli outlets, there is a groupthink pattern within a lot of Israeli analysts and media journalists. But like, I've honestly been pleasantly surprised by the evolution of the Times of Israel.
Yeah.
I've found them to be a really interesting source of information. I love Haaretz, and as much as I love them, I've also seen a certain political orientation. I mean, that's obvious.
Right,
that's like,
of course.
so, but like, I'm gonna go to their conference. Like they just did a profile on me. I've written for them before, but like, you know, there's a certain orientation there whereby I don't feel that there's an interest to, with a few exceptions, I don't feel like there's really an interest to highlight enough anti-Hamas voices. Mm-hmm. Because A, that's not really their focus, and B, but again, I'm speaking in generalities here. I want to be fair to everyone. So I feel like I just probably created more questions and doubts.
What you did is actually, I think it's, number one, it's honest. And number two, I think it's important because it's highlighting. Here's what I think. We had a brief conversation earlier about the social media economy and how peace doesn't get likes and views. And there are there's an argument that there are some feel good accounts that like, yo, this is peaceful, this is wonderful, and they get likes. But as a creator, and you as well, very unique insight into what gets more engagement in terms of, and I don't think there's a logical person alive today who doesn't understand that mainstream media makes money off of bad news. That's when people that's what's going to get their attention. I mean, we look at COVID, like all of a sudden COVID happens and the news just goes nuts and they're making money off of scaring people. And we see this, the news is very rarely reporting anything good because people will watch if it's really, really bad. And now with social media, people, quote unquote, independent journalists and being their own news sources now, the money is driven by horrific news.
Precisely.
And that money is likes and views. And so now independent journalism and social media accounts have gone down the same route as mainstream media, which is let's just report horrible things because that's what's going to give us more likes and views and followers.
Precisely.
And so I think here I don't have the answer either, but what I do know is as long as there are people like you and as long as there are people who are going out of their way to have these conversations, that's who you should be paying attention to. If one group is dehumanizing another group, I wouldn't pay attention to that news source. If they're making it appear as though it's all black and white, I was having a conversation with someone last night who was saying that this conflict isn't complex at all. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like,
exactly. I mean, it used to be triggering to say that it's very complicated because people want these simple black and white depictions. And yes, some aspects of this conflict you can quickly ascertain like what the overall idea is, but to ignore that, Gaza, for example, is a complex place that you can't understand. You can't just call it a concentration camp as a way to try to understand why October 7th happened.
Correct.
That's not attractive to people to say. And it's very uncomfortable when I tell people, I'm not trying to dehumanize. I'm trying to say like Gaza during the blockade had its first shopping mall in 2010. Gaza had shopping malls and had like not everybody afforded these shopping malls, obviously. Gaza had like beautiful beaches. Gaza had amazing parks and exactly. So like Gaza wasn't this like to say Gaza was the Warsaw Ghetto or Auschwitz. That makes me very uncomfortable.
Yeah,
because it's an attempt to oversimplify at the expense of the fact that a lot of people in Gaza, and I see this in Arabic. They say, I ate amazing food before the war. I wore excellent clothes before the war. I used to get massages once a month before the war. Like, don't try to make me seem like I was living in, a complete desert, crawling on the ground with no food in my belly. So like, people almost like some people in Gaza, they're like, we're not beggars. We don't want to be on stop depicting us as these primitive beings that just lived in squalor and Hamas just had to launch this attack. Hamas's attack destroyed our lives a bit further. But to the earlier point, I would be wary of anybody who claims to represent all Palestinians or to speak on behalf of the Palestinians. Similarly, I do the same with Israelis, and especially in a diaspora outside of the land. Anybody who attempts to say that I and only I can speak for them. So that's one component of the news cycles. The other thing is, multiple things are true at once. It is so important to verify information. But sometimes that need to verify, I've seen that be used as an attempt to basically dismiss anything that cognitively is uncomfortable for you to understand.
Yep.
So again, multiple truths. That's the Realign for Palestine movement that I'm trying to. Well, it's a project. It's an organization that I'm the director of, but it's also like it's partly a framework. It's partly a way of thinking. You know, the rejection of violence, radical pragmatism, normalizing multiple truths, the two-nation solution, which is a different way of saying the two-state solution without being so caught up in the border debate. The idea that, you know, there is space for agency, the idea that Hamas is a despicable player, the idea that, you know, unhelpful narratives that have been promulgated since October 7th are not helpful, are not serving the people of Gaza on the ground. So that is another framework to think about, is the idea of multiple truths that
Shocking.
Hamas has abused. Like, Hamas has abused a lot of things in Gaza, but not everything that gets hit in Gaza should necessarily automatically mean Hamas was right there, and therefore when we see a decimated child and his mother and entire families just completely wiped out, that we should just say, oh well, too bad, Hamas was there. Like, that's callous, like that's wrong, that's inaccurate, and that's unhelpful.
Agreed. And that's the result of dehumanization.
Precisely.
When you can see that without any empathy, with just pure like, oh well, and just say it's not our fault. It's like that's not the response you should be having at all.
Precisely.
I want to talk. You had a really interesting post. You spoke how you went to Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates, recently, and you spoke very highly of the Abraham Accords. You said the visit reignited your hope for three main reasons. You said it reignited your hope because Israelis and Arabs cooperated freely and amicably. You said Emirati officials were clear in their support for Palestinian freedom while unequivocally denouncing Hamas and armed resistance. And you said these Arab leaders view Israel as a partner, not an enemy. Can you explain the significance of the Abraham Accords, especially for people who might not really know what they are, and how you see this impacting the future of the Palestinian people?
So the Abraham Accords, I think of it as kind of like there's two tiers to them. There's the kind of just political diplomatic tier, which is just the mere agreement, and that is the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain and Morocco on one side, and Israel on the other side, facilitated by the United States, by the first Trump administration, agreed to normalize relationships, political relationships, and that slowly grew into diplomatic, some social, some economic relationships. So that's that's kind of like the one way to look at the Abraham Accords. But for me, what I think is far more significant about the Abraham Accords with these particular three nations, and especially with the United Arab Emirates, is that there really was a revolution it was not just the cold peace, for example, that happened with Egypt, between Egypt and Israel, whereby 50 years after the signing of the Camp David peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, Egypt is one of the most anti-Semitic societies in the region, and there's really no favorable attitudes towards. I mean, there are a lot of Egyptians that are I think would share my assessment of Hamas, would share my views on the need to cooperate with Israel. The Egyptian government has certainly cooperated very closely with Israel from a security point of view, politically on Gaza and Hamas. And increasingly also economically. Israel exports a lot of gas to Egypt, and there are closer economic ties. The UAE, there was a social component to it that normalized the idea of Israelis visiting, participating in tourism, building close friendships between Israelis and Emiratis continuing and maintaining their strong Muslim Arab culture that is part of the Muslim world, but also being extraordinarily friendly and hospitable to Israelis, holding space for multiple truths, hosting Israelis, building the Abrahamic, the Abraham house of the mosque, the church, and the temple, and going beyond the Abraham Accords simply being a political agreement. It was a reorientation toward peace, toward acknowledging that Israel is here to stay, toward ditching sloganeering, toward abandoning any of the unhelpful rhetoric, toward de-radicalizing a lot of, I mean, they had already done this, decades before, but like their curriculums, which some people place too much emphasis on high school, on school and university curriculums. I think it's just as important as who teaches, because we had, when I was a child in Gaza and I went to UNRWA schools, the UN schools, our curriculum didn't say anything about hate the Jews or kill the Jews or resist Israel or this or that. I actually remember UNRWA used to discipline teachers back then for deviations. The issue that happened is that there are those who editorialize. So the curriculum and the lesson plan is here, but then the teacher is going to incorporate political news or their own extremism or their own visions. And that happens a little bit in math class, a little bit in the Arabic class, a little bit in religion class, a little bit in the art class. I remember the painting class. So like there would just be little subtle ones. And then not supposedly, in actuality, some of that may have gotten a lot worse when Hamas took over, because it was just a different broad environment. So there was no UNRWA curriculum. It was the Palestinian curriculum. So anyway, I digressed. The Emirates was just amazing to see Israelis in there. I went to a political conference, and I was able to speak to, there were senior current and former Israeli officials and think tankers and people across the spectrum. There were Arabs, there were Emiratis, there were sadly hardly, if any, Palestinians present. I was probably one of the few, let alone one from Gaza. But it was such... And then afterwards, I got to speak with Emiratis, kind of in like a track 2 setting, if you will. These were not official Emiratis. These were young people. And they had hosted several Israelis. They had hosted the Israeli ambassador. They hosted me. And it was just so fascinating. I mean, it was like, oh my God, like in the Emirates, they are doing something that is increasingly difficult for me to do at a lot of U.S. college campuses. I get like attacked and chased out in college campuses and yelled at and called a traitor and get like death threats and threats of violence. And meanwhile, I go to a Muslim country where all the women were covered up and there were hijabis and all the men were super conservative from a cultural point of view. But they were like, we want to hear your message about Hamas, and we want to hear your message about healing and reconciliation, and what does that look like, and how does that fit into the region and Islam, and boom, 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 an exchange of ideas.
Isn't that wild?
It was amazing. It was like, it was the first time I had done it in an Arab Muslim context. But it also gave me hope. Now, is that every single part of the Arab world, every single part of the UAE, but like, I see the potentiality of that. I see the potentiality of the Arab youth. And that's why when I said earlier, to think that the Israeli government is going to throw away the potential to replicate that in Saudi, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in other parts of the Middle East, in expanding it so that you can have some settlements in Gaza and keep a bunch of crazy settlers in the West Bank. Like the lack of strategic foresight to miss that opportunity and to understand that the next generation of Arabs and Muslims and even Palestinians who are not stupid, who are seeing what's happening, and they're like, yeah, Gaza's destroyed for what? The potentiality is why I want Israeli thinkers. I want the pro-Israel, the real pro-Israel, not the quote pro-Israel community, not the Hasbara, not the influencers, not all of that artificial, superficial stuff. To think about how like times are changing, and the longer this Gaza war goes on, the longer this military occupation goes on, the more entrenched the injustices against the Palestinian people, the more the rejection of this pathway to Palestinian statehood that can entirely be done in a way compatible with Israeli security, simply by not allowing Qatar to give billions of dollars to a terror organization that ends up carrying out the worst attack on the Jewish people since the Holocaust. Again, all of that is entirely doable in exchange for, think of the economic ties, the pharmaceutical industry in Israel, and how if it gets into the Saudi market and the Emirati market, think of the security architecture, think of the forward placement of anti-missile air defenses and the coordination of Saudi and Israeli defenses so that the next Houthi missile is intercepted well before it comes anywhere near the Ben Gurion airport.
Yeah.
Anyway, you slice and dice this at a cultural level. I mean, Israelis are flying to Thailand and to India and to Australia and all over. Meanwhile, there's this entire region that sadly, I mean, and many Jewish Israelis come from Mizrahi roots, and from Arab nations. Like the potential for the return and the reintegration into the region, I see that as positive for all of us, for the Palestinian people, for the Israelis, for the peoples of the Middle East. And so that just gave me a jolt of hope to see that up close with the Abraham Accords. Again, not strictly as a political agreement reached by the Trump administration. This goes far beyond Trump, far beyond the mere framing. This has to do with the courageous leadership of the UAE, which I may not agree with all of their decisions on other issues throughout the Middle East. I'm not a shill for anyone. I'm an American, I'm an independent, but like on this specific issue, it was incredible to and connecting with some of the senior leadership of the Emirates. I mean, they've really made an amazing, the social experiment and engineering of their society, and the success of, a top-down approach that has really transformed the economy, the society, is unbelievable.
I was so excited when I saw you post about that for all of these reasons, because it shows it's not just a political agreement. Like, this is like people are taking action, as you said, the courageous leadership, and you don't have to agree with a government or a people in order with everything they do. I mean, I don't agree with everything I've done in the past, right? Like I've grown, and so you don't have to agree with every single thing in order to respect some things that are going to make a huge difference and set a precedent for an amazing impact and growth. What I just find comical is we have these college students or people protesting, whether it's here in the United States or in Europe or Australia or wherever, speaking on behalf of a group of people who they don't know, they don't understand. Meanwhile, in the UAE, you have Arabs and Jews and Israelis meeting together and excited to hear opposing views and opinions in order to achieve peace once and for all. It's
precisely
extraordinary.
And they, like, that's exactly what it was. It's like I saw the realization of the multiple truths idea in the UAE, in the Arab world, before the United States, man.
Yeah.
Like what's
going
on? Come on, man. It was like, no, we love the Palestinian people. The UAE, by the way, before the current closure, for most of the war in Gaza, was the largest, from a tonnage point of view and from a financial point of view, the largest provider of humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza, thanks in large part to their relationship with Israel and ability to coordinate with Israel due to the political agreements. So that's what forward-looking leadership and potentiality. Imagine that mindset applied not just here in the United States, but also in a Gaza context and as part of the transformation of Gaza and opening Gaza up. But this is where, going back to the Realign for Palestine vision, which is a dual track, that's the organization that I started. It's a dual track strategy of working on advocacy and changing the narrative, but also working on pragmatic policy proposals and ideas to rejuvenate and reconstitute Gaza so that there's a renaissance, not simply a reconstruction. That's where UAE style leadership and thinking can absolutely revolutionize Gaza. And that's where connecting Gaza beyond Israel and Egypt, connecting Gaza through a corridor, through an airport and a seaport, and through a physical corridor, a rail pipeline and a fiber optic corridor to the Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf, is, I think, is going to be immensely transformative, especially if it ultimately leads to the UAE. A high-speed train that goes from the UAE to the port of to Haifa, or to the port of Haifa, and it stops over in Gaza.
That'd be incredible.
Right?
That'd be incredible.
Right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Traversing Saudi Arabia, traversing parts of Jordan, traversing so many. And think of all the tourism attractions
Yes.
along the way, all the spaces the Palestinians and Israelis and others can visit. And we'll have to be, this isn't all rosy, amazing, like all at once. There'll be phases of this, but we're young people,
Yeah.
and we can make the future a better place for our people. And that's where I choose to put my energy in thinking about Gaza and thinking how I want to honor the legacy of my fallen family members by breaking away from the vicious cycle of hatred, incitement, violence, revenge, rinse and repeat, and by using it as fuel for my soul, for my mind, for my work, for my ethos, to really be a force for construction, for building, that will also be a part of the healing process between our two people and the integration of the Palestinian and Israeli people with the broader region.
Well, I think you're doing an incredible job, and you've broadened my mind in many ways, and I appreciate all of that. We're not done, by the way. I have some more questions I want to ask you. Going off of the tragedy of your family members who've been lost, before we started recording, you were talking about health and fitness. I wasn't planning on asking it, but since you brought it up, can you talk, you've suffered unimaginable loss just in the last year and a half, never mind prior to that. How has this impacted your mental health, physical health, emotional health? I quite frankly don't even know what else to say outside of that. Like, how have you been doing?
Well, I won't mince words, I'll be honest. I mean, it has been truly the most difficult chapter of my life on multiple levels. And I say this, by the way, I mean, there are people in Gaza that are suffering 50 times worse than me. So, I am immensely privileged. I always like to highlight that. I have a brother in Gaza who's still there. I have some surviving family members who are still there. I helped get some family members out, but some are still there. I'm not gonna lie. I used to be extraordinarily physically fit before this war, and I've gained 30 pounds since the war. I haven't worked out once since October 7th, not once. Something that I feel incredibly sad and almost ashamed of. There's an immense sense of shame, like physical shame. And one of the interesting things, interesting as in I laugh it off, because, I've had so many of the pro-Israel community disagree with me. But for some reason, and call me all sorts of horrible names, for some reason they've never made remark. Literally, I get attacked by both sides. They've never made fun of my appearance, but some elements of the quote pro-Palestine community, they love making fun of how I appear. They always call me. By the way, I have an afro. My natural. I'm not that there's anything wrong with.
Wow, you're anti-bald. You're an anti-bald.
But I choose to shave my head. I have. They call me fat. They call me a devil worshiper. They make fun of my appearance all the time. They're
really?
Lay off the burritos. You're so ugly. You look so terrible. You're so bloated. You look they just lean in as if somehow I'm gonna look at that and be like, oh my god,
that's it. That's my all right.
I'm done. Or you balding devil worshiper. I don't know why.
That's so
Devil worship.
interesting to see the difference as well in terms of like tactics, like that.
And I'm sure somewhere along the line, some
I'm sure.
pro-Israel person called someone else
Yeah, of
and
course.
name that made fun of their physical attributes. But I digress. But like, you know, I do what I've lost in my physical health. I try very hard to make up for in my mental health, and I am a big believer in the mind-body connection, and that's not just voodoo cliche stuff. That is entirely accurate. I mean, my blood pressure is through the roof, and
Is it?
and I've completely. My God, like yes, but
We got to fix that.
it's under control.
Okay, thank God. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So but like on the other hand, the amount of folks in Gaza who are regularly, and in the diaspora, Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims, who regularly reach out to me and say, thank God you're saying what we know is true, but we struggle saying so publicly. Even here in the United States, they're like, we're sorry you get all these threats and all this bullying and all this, that, but like, I'm just so glad someone else is saying it. I'm just so relieved someone else is doing what you're doing. That is food and fuel for my soul.
Yeah.
Even if it's often in private, it's literally, man, God is my witness. Just in the last 48 hours, I've randomly had 6 Gazans reach out to me, including a couple of people that I've known but I've not talked to in a while. And one person called me yesterday out of the blue, a good, really dear friend of mine who lives here in the United States and who came with me to the United States on the same program. But he returned to Gaza before me. That's why he was able to enter. And then before Hamas abducted Gilad Shalit and before the borders closed. And he called me yesterday. He was like, dude, I just want to be honest with you. I'm really worried about you, man. I'm worried about all these people. What you're saying is literally what everybody in Gaza believes, but is afraid to say publicly. But I just don't want a crazy lunatic coming out of nowhere and taking a swipe at you. Like you're too young. Like we need you. Like, so he literally was like, it's like, do you have guns? Do you have like private security? Do you like screen your surroundings? Are you good? Like, do you pay attention? Like he was like, please, man, just pay attention. Please, like just pay attention. Don't. You're too young. We don't want you to, and unfortunately, that is a fact. The amount of threats of violence and hatred that I have received is unfucking believable. We can
swear. It's okay.
Okay.
Unless you want to take it out.
No,
I swear
that's fine.
all the time.
That's fine. But like, it's unreal. It's unreal, man. It's like, and I'm like, guys, like I literally agree with like probably 70% or 60% of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like my profile says I'm pro-Palestine, anti-Hamas, anti the military occupation, and pro-peace and coexistence. Like what is so terrible about that? Like, how is that such a treacherous collaborationist Mossad agent?
Yeah.
And like I've had one of the former and he's I don't want to give him too much air, but like one of the former like Al-Qaeda preachers who's now in a Western country.
No way.
In his Friday sermon, like talk about like treacherous scum, like this Palestinian scum, and
gosh.
And then after he does that, like all the incomings, I've had this paper, this rag that the pro-Palestine community love that claimed I'm being paid, all this money to promote genocide. I've had just so many hit pieces against me by far leftists, by pedophiles, by extremists, by terrorists, But I've also had, like, don't get me wrong, it is okay if somebody wants to disagree with
fine.
my position. That's fine. But the sad thing is that very seldom does the disagreement stand on its own. Mm-hmm. It's usually immediately followed up by an attempt to delegitimize me, by a personal insult, by an attempt to say that I'm at the Atlantic Council, I'm in DC, I only lived in Gaza for whatever, whose family, I was chased out of Gaza, I was this, I was that. So like that's the problem. That is to say that all of the aforementioned really has a toll on my well-being, or can have a toll. But over time, I've developed immunity to it. The hundreds of thousands of impressions and views and engagements, and my email, I have 2 email inboxes that are just, there are hundreds of messages every day. And poor Melanie has to just constantly help me with that. But and I'm working through it, and it's never enough. My inbox is on socials. And the good news is there's actually a way to make this, to make up for some of the, and I don't eat crap. Like, I'm not eating fast food all the time. It's just a matter of, like, I mean, good food eaten at the wrong time, late at night, not conducting, not doing physical exercises, traveling all the time.
Traveling is brutal.
Sometimes I mean, I like to stay hydrated, but I wonder if that contributes to like a fluid retention. Like, I'm beating my body down. I've also mastered the art of adrenaline on tap.
Okay.
And I feel like that is shaving off, probably shaved off 10 years off of my life. But what I encourage folks to think about is that physical exercise is a privilege and a blessing. That if you have any space in your life to take it, and you're just not optimizing to take it, like I'm begging you to please do it for me. Do it for the many of us who genuinely, I mean, this week, in less than a week, I was in California for a couple of days, then Colorado a couple of days, and then I'm now in Dallas for a day. And then I'm going to go back to Washington, and then for 2 days. And then I'm going to go to New York City, and then come back to Washington, then New York City, and then go to Oslo, and then potentially London, and then Paris. So it's tough. But I also, what sustains me is the amazing potential of seeing people respond positively to my ideas, seeing Palestinians, seeing policymakers who have never met a Gazan, who have never interacted with a Palestinian that they call a moderate in their own term. And I have mixed feelings about the term moderate, a pragmatic Palestinian. And then finally, actually eating well. When I can, I do cook, believe it or not. And I use really good ingredients. I go for lean options. I always balance out. I have it down to a science for my healthy days, to, a little bit of carbs, the veggies, and the protein. The plate always has to have that. You'll never see a plate with just pure carbs or just pure protein alone. I've cut, believe it or not, I've actually cut back. Like, I hardly ever smoke right now.
Okay.
I've cut that back.
Good. That's amazing.
During the war.
Usually it goes the other way.
It goes the other way. Yeah. To where it's only like 1 cigarette a day. And sometimes I'll go 2 days without like a cigarette.
That's amazing. Good.
So and this is exclusively at night and exclusively after my day is over. It's kind of like a reward for the end of the day. And recently, I only recently watched the very first show on like one of those streaming services. It was on Amazon. It was The Reacher. And now I got into the Blacklist.
Yeah.
And it literally took me over a year and a half to get to a place where I can watch something on like TV.
Yeah.
Just sitting down like TV. So now what I do is I download it on my phone, and all the flying.
Yeah.
I just watch it.
Smart.
So that actually also, I know that sounds silly.
No, it doesn't.
But it's such a reward when I get to watch like a show. Like, it feels so amazing. And it's like, oh my God, like just simple pleasures, It's like time alone, a little bit of music, a cigarette, just my show.
You could decompress.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, that's such a
important.
pleasure. And without like, I'll share something else that was really a challenge. Believe it or not, and I'm constantly, I'm out there. I'm doing a lot of things. I'm a very, very extroverted introvert.
Okay.
So most people think that I'm just like an insane extrovert. But I very much so need to retreat at the end of the day, which is difficult because a lot of times, after events, after presentations, after, you have to do socializing and networking and you have to go to spaces. And so that can get a little bit challenging. So,
Yeah.
so that's my dose of humanizing Ahmed for the audience that otherwise think of me as a robot that's just going from show to show without showing anything about my private life.
Well, I'm going to have you back here. I know Melanie was like, hey, we got to hop off, but I want to say we need you around much longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a lifetime membership to my inner circle.
Would love that.
Which is exercise, nutrition, all of that. I'm going to give you so you can. It's an app, so you can access it. But even if you just move, just steps, just walking in.
Precisely.
When you're in New York, DC, traveling, if you're in the airport, just walk because it makes a massive impact on your health. And we need you and your voice around as long as we possibly can.
Inshallah, absolutely.
You are incredible. I am beyond blessed to have had you come out here today. I'm speechless. I think you're an incredible human being. I say with my whole heart and soul, I love you. I appreciate you. You have all of my love, and we'll put where everyone can follow you in the show notes and everything.
Certainly. My socials, and there's my socials on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, but also there's Realign for Palestine. That I would love it if folks follow that and start. Realign for Palestine is me trying to create infrastructure around myself so that it's no longer just about Ahmed, but it's inviting like-minded, moderate, pragmatic Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim voices who want to be part of this new vision, who want to be part of thinking differently. And it's slow, it's gradual. We just launched it, but there are a lot of folks who are like, I want to be on it, and I'm just a little bit nervous. Give me a little bit of time. It's very difficult for some in our community to put themselves out there. Some are like, I have family, I have a business, my community is a little bit intense. Give me a minute. But I want to grow the following and the audience of Realign for Palestine to really create a global community that can amplify like-minded voices who want something else, something fundamentally different. And I appreciate you elevating that voice and being part of that journey. And I love you too, brother.
It's my pleasure. Realign for Palestine. We will put that in the show notes. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you follow Realign for Palestine. Make sure you follow Ahmed. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, please leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're watching. I hope you have a wonderful week. I'll talk to you soon.